My friend Vince Godfrey has served at a number of different churches as worship pastor, worship leader, whatever terminology that particular church might have used, different places of the country, and even different denominations. So he's got this wider, I think, eclectic background. He's actually currently studying for his master's in worship studies. And so I sat down with Vince and I just talked to him about, what would you like to share with other worship leaders? And some of the things he said were pretty profound, but especially I think this idea that we're looking at today, where he talks about how often worship leaders can try to be people pleasers. And I understand this is not going to hit 100% of the people that are watching this video, but I would encourage you to watch it with an open mind, because you might find yourself in some of the things that he says. I think oftentimes as the creative artsy people, we have a tendency to want to be people pleasers, and Vince says maybe that's not the best idea. Take a look.
That old adage where there's 200 people, there's 201 opinions about worship and music. And these are people that you serve alongside. These are just as imperfect as I am, and they have their likes and dislikes, but that could also make ministry much more interesting at times. I do this, and my friend Tom Croyder does this as well, but I've done this for a while, where I go into a place and ask people what their favorite songs are and their least favorite songs are, and every single place I've ever been, there's an overlap of someone's favorite and someone else's least favorite. So that dynamic is existing, I would guess, in almost every worship house, every congregation, every set of worshipers, big or small. You get two together, they're going to have one song the favorite, one song the least favorites. You could have the best worship experience that maybe you've ever experienced, and the next thing you know, the first thing you hear is somebody yelling at you. We had, a couple years ago, we had introduced this beautiful arrangement by Eric Weiss of the Lord's Prayer, which at my school we do every worship service. It's just become part of our culture there. And we introduced it as a choral song, and the congregation could join us if they wanted to, because it goes into several part harmony. Absolutely beautiful. The service was gorgeous. It was a communion service, a service about grace. It just was one of those things that God just brought everything together, as he often does. After the service, I had a gentleman come up to me, yelling at me, nose to nose, pressing his finger into my chest, threw the bulletin crumbled up in my chest, and yelled at me for taking the Lord's Prayer and doing that horrible thing to it, and ruining the one thing he came to worship for that day. It was shocking. It was a little extreme. And somebody asked me if I was okay, and all I could think of is I felt a little sorry because that person missed out on a lot of worship. That song was near the beginning of the worship service, which means for 15 minutes they stewed. And they missed so much that God could offer. Many people, in my experience, are called into worship ministry, especially who are performers, who love pleasing people. I mean, a lot of us get into music because we like pleasing people, but I love that Galatians passage that said, if I'm about pleasing people, then I'm not pleasing God, is our priority. So I think that's another thing that's been really important in my life, and it's really changed over the years, is becoming less and less of a people pleaser, which is my nature, and more of a God pleaser. And I think that's definitely a journey God, he made me that way on purpose, to be more reliant on him. It's harder because it's easier to please people. People say it's hard. It really is easier to please people. But when you're pleasing God first, it's not as easy at times. And I think that's what we're called to do. We're called to please God first and foremost in worship ministry. It's nice to be liked too. It's nice to have people like what we do, but that cannot be the goal. It cannot be the way that leads us.
Okay, so Vince has built a pretty strong case about being a God pleaser rather than a people pleaser. And now he's going to share, I think, a practical foundation of how we can make sure that we're better on track for that. This gets a little bit heady here in understanding this, but I think it's very worth it. Take a look.
Over the years, as I've got my education, I've learned a phrase that I've adopted is this kind of priority of what worship can be, and it is to me now, and like I said, I adopted it, and that's kind of an order of biblical, theological, historical, missiological, and contextual, all fancy words, but it starts with God, and about the Bible being our main source of divine revelation, or pointing to Jesus as a divine revelation. But starting, what is biblical? What did God tell us? The theological, I would say those things that aren't said in the Bible but can be supported by the Bible. Historical, I think there needs to be something in account there, going into where you are in your church, maybe your denomination, maybe the makeup of your community. So that's important. Missiological, what's the purpose of the church? What's the mission of the larger church? What's the mission of your church in that context? And then contextual. And the reason that order is important for me is quite often I've experienced that some worship leaders have gone the opposite way. They start with contextual, what's going to make people happy, and then they try to please God in the long run. So that's that Galatians 1 feeling of contextual, making everyone happy, and then we try to put everything else in the box after that. And I think obviously God needs to be the first thing in the box: biblical, theological, historical, missiological, contextual.
Again, I think Vince has given us there a good platform, a good foundation for getting God in his rightful place, instead of the people being first and foremost in our thoughts and our planning and our doing things. And so I want you to take this idea and prayerfully consider, what does this mean for your situation as you look at that idea of biblical, theological, historical, missiological, contextual, getting it in the right order. What would that mean for you, and how could you apply that in your situation? I want you to prayerfully consider that as you ponder over what was just said.
Brought to you by myworshipleadingcoach.com.
Helping you to be more fully equipped as a worship leader.